When we went through that investment phase and we took on I sold a bit of equity and we were going to float onto the AIM market. And we actually, for anyone who's ever done this, and if you haven't done it, it costs a lot of money. We took on investment to support us through that journey. And we actually signed off. You sign off on a 3-day announcement to say that on Wednesday we're coming on the market. And we'd done that. That was on Friday. We had a little glass of champagne with a few people. And then all of a sudden, over the weekend, our broker, who every public company needs a broker, our broker who had helped us raise the money and worked with us on the project, went bust over the weekend. And that was the start of the financial crisis.
From Coordinate Sport, it's The Drive Phase, a show about sports founders, leaders and experts and the stories behind their business journey. Our guest on this episode is David Batch, founder and chief executive of Premier Education Group, the #1 provider of sport and physical activity to primary schools in the UK. David is a real inspiration to business owners in our sector, pioneering the franchise model to national coverage over the last 20 years. During the episode, we get to know David and his journey from professional football to launching and scaling the Premier brand, and more recently, going through acquisitions within the education sector. David speaks candidly about his business philosophies and the importance of creating and maintaining strong strategic partnerships. Sit back, enjoy, and take notes from a market-leading CEO in action. Okay, so really excited to have David Batch, founder and CEO of Premier Education Group, with us today. A real pioneer of the industry, really, starting out in 1999, and he's grown the business to now work with over 240,000 children every year. The group has multiple businesses in that we're going to touch on, and a really large franchise operation. So really excited for today and so much to cover. So thanks very much for your time, David.
No, it's great to be invited. Thank you so much.
Well, as I mentioned there, normally we kind of look at early life first, but I think it's probably important to set the scene and give a bit of context really for the listeners just around the group, the Premier Education Group.
We started our business in 1999, and that business predominantly was what would now be the children's activity space. To begin with, it was purely holiday courses, and that developed into working within schools, around schools, during school curricular time as well over the years. And that is still an absolute core business, and that is what we do, and that is what we are known for, and that is where we get the numbers that you talked about.
So is that Premier then, David? That's Premier Sport?
Yeah, that was Premier Sport, and we now call it Activate because we have much more than sport going on in that particular business with life skills and well-being and performing arts. So I'm sure we'll cover some of that a bit later. But to help support that during the journey that we've been on, we realised that the training of the staff that we were taking on probably wasn't to the level that we wanted it in our franchise network. So we set up a training business, which is much more fluid for the needs of our franchise owners and the staff that are working in schools. We've got about 1,200 staff, certainly pre-COVID, working in schools every single day. So what we call the Premier operating standards that we adhere to is very high, and we need to ensure that all of those have got access to the training at the right time and the right training. So we set up our own training business, which does that. It doesn't just do our own internal network, it does external work as well with other organisations. So, and that has evolved into working in apprenticeships as well. And this year, at one point, the highest we had is 178 apprentices working in that particular or through that particular business. So that's great, and it's all designed around driving standards. That's the whole point of it. That's why we did it. We set up our training business because we want the standards in our activity business, our franchise business, to be much, much higher and keep driving it. And they're already high.
Definitely, that might be a good one to touch on later as well with the I know the apprenticeships and the standards, and whether I'm not sure if there is one. I know it's always been in the works for a while, an apprenticeship standard for the industry. I don't know if is it come through yet? But...
Yeah, well, that is in kind of development stroke talks to do that, and there are other apprenticeships that we think are relevant in the meantime. But yeah, that certainly would be much better to have an industry standard one, which would be endorsed and recognised. So that is important. Off the back of that, we also realised that actually the qualifications that we had, the content of the courses that we were getting, that our guys were doing, probably again weren't relevant or weren't to the kind of level that we wanted for our staff to go through. And it always seemed a bit of a mismatch that we were cobbling together a qualification from over here and a qualification from over there and saying, look, if you've got both of those, then you may have the skills. And what we did is we invested in setting up an awarding organisation, which is now Ofqual regulated. And that organisation writes qualifications. Again, it doesn't write them just for us. We've got qualifications in prisons. We've got qualifications that are going into schools. There are qualifications going into lots of different sporting governing bodies. And, of course, qualifications for our own network of staff, which, again, we think push the boundaries and give them the absolute right skills and qualities to work in the setting that they're working in, which is great because ultimately what that does is make our activity business and our activity work that we'd actually do with the kids better. So that was a journey there. And the other part of the group that we have is another business that we purchased probably about 5-6 years ago, which is a school improvement business. And we have a number of experts working for local authorities or with local authorities, working with multi-academy trusts, with individual schools, and they're going in and supporting them to normally the senior leaders and governors in schools to help them deliver better education for the kids. And that fits in because it's a similar model to what we do, which is deploying people, high quality people, to go and support school improvement. But it also fits in with us because those people can help ensure and, for want of a better term, externally verify the quality of work that we're delivering in schools as well. So that is our group in a nutshell. And yeah, it's a little bit different to what it was in 1999, that's for certain.
It's all about, it seems to be all about quality, all the different strands. It's all based on improving standards and quality delivery. Okay, then, because we needed to look at the breadth of the operation and kind of the context. But if we like travel back and talk about your early life, I know it seemed like maybe you're destined to be an entrepreneur. I know, not that I don't know if it's that long ago, but just from our kind of research and stuff, it seems like you've always been destined to be an entrepreneur. I don't know what your kind of childhood and I guess your first early memories, school life, what was that like?
I think what you're referring to there is the piece where me and my friend, who's still my friend, still my best friend, used to, I suppose, want of a better word, hustle a little bit at school. We used to try and make the best out of the situation we were in and sell things to our classmates and copy things, copy things that we probably shouldn't be copying, music and stuff, and sell tapes, as it were, back then. And it was. There was a little company at school as well. One of the things that the school did was to encourage kind of entrepreneurship, and the fifth years, which is now year 11s, would always have a business that they ran from the school, and we set one up.
Okay, like chopping boards, like.
Yeah. We bought planks of wood for virtually nothing. We got one of the dads to do a little bit of woodwork and just carve a little thing on the side, which cost us nothing, the direct cost. And at the time, we sold them for what we thought was a ridiculous amount of money, for about £6, I think it was. And we used to take them to craft fairs and things. We did pretty well out of it, actually. So, and the whole point was, showing how to buy raw material, turn it into a product, sell it, where to sell it, and that kind of thing. And I quite enjoyed all that kind of thing. It was good. And I certainly found when I left school and I kind of went into sport as opposed to further education, although that did involve a little bit of education, my passion, if you like, even when I was working, and even when I was working in sport after that, I still felt a little bit itchy all the time that I needed to go out and do something and create something. And my last, I suppose, job, where I found I was working for somebody else, was at a football club where I was the under-18 coach. I was actually the youngest full-time football coach in the professional club in the country at the time. And I did that, and it was great. And I did it for about 4 years, I think. But I did find myself getting really itchy feet that I needed to go out and do something. My mate that I referred to at the start, I visited him while I was doing that job, and he was running a few football courses, which I helped him to set up. And I felt really jealous. I felt really jealous of him that he had a kind of lifestyle where he was creating something and making things happen. And at that point, I decided that that's what I wanted to do and to get back into. And in 1999.
So just in terms of school, whereabouts did you grow up? North. And what was school like for you? I mean, because we're going to talk about the work that your organisation is doing in schools, etc. What was kind of your experience of sport and PE, I guess, in primary school, and what was the impact you can remember?
Primary school, we played sport most days and games, PE, most days, which was great and, something I certainly enjoyed. High school, for me, was during the period of the teachers' strike, and there are probably not many people who listen to this who can remember that time. So pretty much all sport ceased and all extracurricular activity ceased, and we didn't do a lot. I'm not sure whether that was necessarily certainly didn't have any effect on me because I had outside interest in what I was doing. But I think from an education perspective, my experience of school wasn't necessarily the academia. I was competent at school and was always going to pass all my GCSEs, however much I tried, which was quite fortunate. But I suppose the downside of that meant I didn't actually try particularly hard. What I concentrated on more was the social element of school. And actually, I don't think that should be underestimated. That's really important. And you can see that now with kids and COVID and stuff. It's really important, that interaction. And to young people who might be listening and kind of growing up and think school's important, education is important. When somebody leaves school and goes into the real world, I don't know of many people who make their mark on their own. I would say that virtually everybody make their mark with teams of people. So that education of learning to work with, for, lead, mates, classmates, groups is absolutely crucial, in my opinion, and is a bigger marker for future life than an exam, although I would never, ever tell my kids that.
Yeah, equally. I mean, in terms of, I guess, leaving school, that teamwork, that's probably, again, built on that. I know you heavily football focused and maybe leaving school, and you were a professional footballer at one time. Is that right? Or did you have a career there?
Yeah, I had a shirt and they gave me some money for it, not a lot, but I played for 2 or 3 managers who, from a business perspective, you wouldn't, on the face of it, think that they would teach you anything because, what's a football manager got to do with everyday life? But, there's some absolutely key lessons now, and I smile fondly and can honestly say that the managers I had as a 16 to 18, 19-year-old, 15 actually to 18-year-old as a football manager were some of the biggest influences on my life, just in terms of the way they managed people, good and bad sometimes, in terms of the expectation, in terms of the discipline, in terms of the organisation, in terms of the kind of rhythm, if you like, what had to be done at what certain times. One of the managers I had was an absolute visionary. He wasn't seeing it at the time, but he was doing things and we were doing things with him in 1988 that have only become commonplace in the last 10 years.
Have you doing yoga and stuff like that? Was it back then?
Yeah. Post-match stretching, nutrition, drinks, and people laughed at us. He was miles ahead of his time. And all of those things, that innovation, that discipline, that organisation, that kind of rhythm, that expectation, all of those things are really important life lessons to take away, and certainly things I've used where possible.
After football, I know you touched on it a little bit earlier around the coaching. So you're really early into the coaching badges and getting qualified to a high level at an early age. Was that because you always knew you wanted to go into start coaching? Or?
I wouldn't say I always wanted to start. Never something that I set off to do. What I found, though, is I just said about the guys, the managers. I found myself in a situation. The football was very different then. I would be, training, playing with the first team every day. The first team were 2 years older than me. We were one club, and it was an interesting time because the club was at a point where, they went from what was then Division 4, League 2 now, to the playoff to get into the first ever Premier League in successive seasons. And no club had ever done that, ever in history. No one has ever since. So there was some really good stuff going on. And it was the same players as well, by the way, that did it. And some really good stuff going on and some really good lessons to learn. And what I found was that I used to kind of like hanging around. If I weren't I wasn't in the first team. I was captain of the U team. I was captain of the reserve team. I was training with the first team most days, but I wasn't ever in the first team for any competitive match. But I just found myself hanging around all the time and wanting to listen. And when other people were standing outside during half time, I was sitting in the drying room, which is about 50 degrees, with my suit and tie on, listening to the team talks because I found it really interesting. So I didn't set out to do that as part of my career, but it just happened. And then about 2 years after I'd left, the then manager, who is a guy called Gary Johnson, who most notably was at Bristol City in the Championship recently, and then his son actually took over, who played for me subsequently as well, Lee. But Gary asked me to come and do the work with the schoolboys at Cambridge. As a result of that, sent me on my what is now UEFA badge. I was 20 years old, and fortunately I passed it and was at the time the youngest person to have done so. I don't know whether anyone has done it younger since, but I kind of found myself on that journey. So it wasn't an intention at all.
And it's kind of at that point when you visited your friend, he was doing the camps, and that's kind of the birth of Premier around that point, right?
Yeah, but a few years after that, I then became the U team manager, as I said, and was working with, and again, it was still one club, so I was working with the first team players as well, and the reserve. I was reserve team manager for a while, and it was on a trip actually when I was watching. He lived in Bristol, and we had a youth cup game against Swansea, the winners of Swansea versus somebody else, and I went on a scouting trip. I was watching Swansea that night, and we played them in the next round, and we beat them actually. But on the way down, I stopped with my mate, and that was when I kind of thought, I want to be doing what he's doing.
And what did that look like then when you I guess take you back to your first ever camp that you ran for yourself, you helping him out at site. But when you brought that back, what did that look like? Your first camp? What did you have the branding? Was it Premier back then, or was it called something else?
When I was at Cambridge, I helped him set up some courses in Bristol. And we had an agreement that if I ever left, that I would set up on this side of the country and he would continue on that side. And he did, and we did that together, not as the same business, separate businesses, but using the same brand, and which I suppose is, that power of one kind of early birth of a thought of a working in partnership like franchising. He stopped doing that after a year or so after doing that. He'd been doing it for a couple of years before I jumped in. And at that point, I left Cambridge. Cambridge United, I think it was in April 1999, and I just had nothing to do. So the first thought was, right, well, I wanted to do these camps, and I set up, I think we set up about 60 camps that summer, from April the 1st to actually running it. We took some staff, I took some staff on from people I knew. Actually, two of them, we took 3 people on at the time, and 2 of them are still with us now. One is our franchisee of the year, franchisee of the year last couple of years, and both of them, the other one has a franchise in London, quite a big franchise, which he doesn't work in on a daily basis. But both of them are senior members of our leadership team. One in terms of expanding our business development and talking to companies that are joining our network, and the other working to support our franchise. So those early days have actually borne some quite important fruits.
I guess at the time, did you know you were onto something? That's one of the questions we always ask. In terms of, you set up the camps, and obviously you weren't messing around. You rolled out 60 camps straight away. I'm assuming at that point you knew you had something. And was it then you thought, right, this is going to be a national business? I'm going to really make it something from that point, or was it straight away? Or did you have like that grand vision at the start?
Look, I wish I could sit here and say that I wrote down on a piece of paper exactly what we do and how we do it, but I can't. Not what we did, or I say we because it goes back to that point where without people like those two guys and lots of other people along the way, none of it would have happened. You can't do it on your own. But pretty much for the first probably 7 or 8 years of the business, I operated the business as an owner operator, as a lot of people do, for good or bad. And I think this is something that we talk about with our franchisees. It's running a business is a journey. There's not many people, and certainly not many SMEs, that go out, raise 30 million to go and build a business that they're going to sell 4 years, 5 years later for 150. It doesn't happen often. It does happen, of course, particularly in software and things like that, but it doesn't happen much. The normal route, the route more trodden, is the one where you set something up, it starts going well, you add a bit on, you start expanding it a bit, and then all of a sudden it starts getting a little bit bigger and bigger and bigger. But because of that, there are certainly defined stages. And we talk to our franchise about some of those stages, about what they are and what kind of different experiences that you will have during those times and how to overcome them, because it is a journey and nothing's ever right. You're always trying to improve something. You're always trying to make something better. But each section of that journey needs to be negotiated before you move on to the next section. And the challenges actually remain the same pretty much throughout all of those journeys or all of those sections. But the numbers just get bigger.
We always touch on, in terms of your decision to franchise, obviously kind of already done it with the kind of the Bristol and the Norfolk connection, doing it that way. What was your journey in franchising? I guess it's a journey for the group as well. And how did that come about? Like, did you always know you were going to franchise? And I guess what was the decision to go that route rather than an organic growth across the country?
So years ago, I worked for a company that did football camps before I got into full-time football coaching in a professional club. I used to do some football camps for a private company. And I ended up buying that company and then selling it on when I went into football full time. And I always found that the reach was limited in terms of, to kind of get the scale, it was very difficult to get the scale operating like that on that model. And I saw the birth of football in the community schemes. And again, all the same issues to growth. And when I set up Premier in 1999, we ran the holiday courses that summer, and then straight away in September started to franchise. Now,
So like after, what's that, 5 or 6 months, was it?
Yeah. It was taking those 3 guys who I said who were working with us. 2 of them, as I said, are still with us and doing great stuff and great guns and part of the senior leadership team. The other one went on to a career in professional football, ended up with Wales, with Liverpool, and still works in professional football now. So it was a good little crew. But let me put it into perspective. The franchising support, the franchising setup, the franchising agreement looks nothing like it looks now as it did then. The concept was there. The concept was that we would grow and expand by working with partners, in this case franchises, who would grow and expand. That's the concept. And we did that, and I did that for a little period of time. I did that for, as I said, probably about 7, 8 years as an owner-operator. And then after that, started to get really serious. And one of the first things that helped get me really serious was when I spoke to our bank, when I spoke to the franchise advisor at the NatWest, who's still there, when I spoke to people who were franchise experts, franchise consultancy experts, my question to them was, tell me the one person in this country I can go and speak to who can help me set up a brilliant franchise organization. And all three people said the same person, interestingly. So all three people that I spoke to all said the same person. They actually called him, they said he looks nothing like him, but he is the David Beckham of franchising. Go and speak to the guy. And he was a former chair of the British Franchise Association. I went and spoke to him, took him out for lunch in Nottingham, told him what we did. And eventually he became our chair and was our chair for about 10 years. And of course, the sort of things you learn from somebody who's already built a huge franchise network, sold it, been chair of the British Franchise Association, about what agreements look like, about what standard practice needs to be, about what excellent practice looks like, and what we need to do to be an excellent franchisor, are invaluable. And they're the things that we put into our business, into our system, and most of those things we still do.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of that, growing at that point, I've definitely mentorship and finding that right person to, and your team as well. You built a great team from the start, really. Really interested to hear about how you scaled up from there. So was it a case of, I mentioned before about outside investment, etc. Did you ever have to take anything on, any investment on externally, or sell any equity or anything like that, just to be able to rapidly grow like you have?
Well, to begin with, as I said, for the first few years when I was an owner-operator, we just grew organically, and it was people who were growing through recommendation. And as a result of that, we ended up with, I think it was about 20 odd franchises at the time. And they were very much, the franchise business and the franchise agreement at that time was very much something that was a single operator, single unit operator. You know, they were going out and earning a living, basically. And they've evolved with us. Some of them early ones in particular have evolved with us, because what then happened after 7 or 8 years, I had an approach to sell some equity in the business, and we took some finance on to go and really expand the business. And what that helped us to do is didn't go exactly as we planned it to, but it certainly helped us to expand and understand, certainly me to understand, that if I'm going to build a business, I can't be an owner-operator anymore. It has to be different. And in terms of franchise recruitment, which was your question, that was when we altered our approach to being, it didn't become organic anymore. It became, okay, how are we going to take on X amount of franchises a year? How are we going to grow their businesses with them? How are we going to support them to do that? What processes, what systems, what underpinning knowledge do they need to know, and how do we deliver it? And that was when I really realised that actually the business of operating a franchise isn't simply, this is what we do, if you copy it, you'll be fine. And I see that a lot. I see it with a lot of franchises, not just in our sector. I see it a lot in our sector. And when I kind of see that, I know that is, from our journey, that is certainly not what you should be doing, because you can't, that is not, I mean, if a franchisee has to go down the same journey as we did, I'm doing something wrong.
Yeah, exactly. You've got a business in the box, and they don't need to go through the challenges that you've had to go through. What's been the major setbacks on that journey of like scaling up? Did you have any major moments? I know you've had probably many, but what was one that sticks out that was kind of a huge setback?
When we went through that investment phase and we took on some, I sold a bit of equity, and we were going to float onto the AIM market. And we actually, I mean, for anyone who's ever done this, and if you haven't done it, it costs a lot of money. We took on investment to support us through that journey. And we actually signed off. You sign off on a 3-day announcement to say that on Wednesday we're coming on the market. And we'd done that. That was on Friday. We had a little glass of champagne with a few people. And then all of a sudden, over the weekend, our broker, who every public company needs a broker, our broker who had helped us raise the money and worked with us on the project, went bust over the weekend. And that was the start of the financial crisis.
Do you reckon, so this is like right in the middle of credit crisis, 2008 time?
It was right at the very start of it. So it almost, that didn't kick off the financial crisis, of course, but it was really at the early onset of it. And I can remember after it happening, someone said to me a few weeks afterwards, blimey, that's probably the best thing that could have happened. And I didn't quite comprehend that at the time. But
so what did that mean then? Did that mean you didn't go onto the market then at that point?
It means we didn't go onto the market. We didn't list the business, which meant that the next round of funding, which we were due to do as we listed, couldn't happen. And we had a hell of a lot of cost that we'd racked up over the previous year or so.
Management fee, consultancy fees.
Duncan Bannatyne's, I don't know how many books he's written, but I've read one of them, and he's got a whole chapter on it when people tried, or he was in the process of floating Bannatyne's. And he calls the chapter Swimming with Sharks. And I think that's a really good kind of description of what that experience is like. And there's so many costs, so many people who are there to help or there to get you onto the market, or regulation-wise you require, but all of them like a big fee.
Yeah.
And that is certainly an expensive job.
I guess that's what entrepreneurs, everyone kind of maybe dreams about that IPO stage, etc. But is that something you reckon you're going to go back and look at again, or do you think it's not on the cards anymore?
Well, exit will be something we do at some point, and the important thing around exit is making sure that the business is building to a state where it's exitable. That's the most important thing. We are doing that, and what that exit will look like, who knows? That is the final part of the jigsaw, to plan out what that looks like, and then we can go and execute that. We've recently taken on a new chair, actually, who's done that before with training providers, and works and still is employed by institutional investors to be chair and executive chair of companies in the educational space. So it needs to be planned that if I'm not there or other key people aren't there, that somebody else already is.
Just moving over to kind of the challenges, I guess this might be one for you back in the early days, but franchisees will be facing them all the time. Obviously, we've got a huge one on at the moment, but trying to imagine that wasn't there. But in terms of day-to-day business challenges, like the ones that come up all the time in our sector, in your business, what would that be, and what do you kind of put in place to deal with them?
For me, there's 4 key pillars of any business, and it does. I said to you earlier that whatever element of the journey you're at, I don't think the challenges change; they just get a little bit bigger. And those 4 challenges are very much strategic, execution, cash, people. That's it. That's all I do. From a day-to-day basis, the strategic one is probably not one that you would end up dealing with on a day-to-day basis. But the other 3, certainly, the execution of that strategic plan, making sure that the cash is coming in when it should come in, making sure that that is controlled, same as any kind of household, same as any kind of business. You look at Dell Computers on that one. Michael Dell, I think he brought the company back after originally selling it and spent something like 3 years just working on that one pillar, and changed the whole business round because they were spending their cash on parts, putting it into production, churning out a computer, giving it to a distributor or shop. They were then selling it, and so their life cycle of their cash from when they spent it to when they got it was inordinate.
Like 6 months or something.
Yeah, he changed it round. You go online, you press what you want on your computer, you choose it, you pay for it, and then he goes and buys the parts and builds it for you within 7 days.
Yeah.
And that was a complete flip. So that's really important. And then, of course, people, which either as a one-man band you haven't got enough, and that's an issue, or you get to a point where you have lots and lots of people, and potentially, as we're seeing now with COVID and the impact of that, in some cases, managing people through that would have been and is one of the biggest challenges, because you're dealing with people's lives.
What would you say some of the myths, like misconceptions or common myths in the industry, just something that you might hear often and it rankles you a little bit or gets you going, pushes your buttons about what's happening in the industry?
I can only talk about our business and what we do, but clearly when we hear, and we all know why that was mentioned at the very outset of when our industry was referred to as white van man some time ago. We all know why that was done and the kind of myth around that. And some people still believe that. And the fact of the matter is there will be people in our industry that aren't to the level they should be at.
Well, yeah, there's good and bad operators in every industry, right? That's the reason for capitalism, yeah.
In every industry, in every profession, there'll be good and bad. You name it, that's there. So, but to tarnish the whole industry with that brush does wind me up, particularly when I see the evidence. And by evidence, I mean the actual impact on the kids. And I see what the schools and what teachers and what parents say about the impact. And that is disappointing that people focus more on the who the deliverer might be rather on what the impact of the delivery is.
Yeah.
Because for me, it's all about the impact. We Ofsted have got the 3 I's, and the last one is impact. Doesn't matter who's delivered that impact. If the impact is high, then it should be celebrated.
Definitely. That brings me on to, in terms of when you said about what people are delivering, I mean, for you and for Premier, so many partnerships that you've established. Obviously, there's the group companies, but you're working with a lot of organizations all across the country. I mean, I don't know if you want to speak to that in terms of, well, who your partners are, but also what your kind of strategies around creating and developing or those strong partnerships that you've got at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key thing, we found ourselves in a position that due to the fact that we had and have got a lot of people on the ground, so to speak, we are a very cost-effective solution to provide a high impact for partner organisations. That's how we are. I can remember several years ago, probably about 15 years ago now, speaking to a particular sport that isn't particularly popular with kids. And they were saying, well, I was speaking to them about a potential partnership. And they said, well, we don't actually need one because we've got 7 development officers dotted around the country who visit schools all the time and work with schools to get this. That on that particular sport is about number 40 on our list of sports that we deliver. And it doesn't surprise me, that they may have changed tack since, I don't know. But what we now find is governing bodies and corporate partners often will work with us to achieve an impact, an outcome. And that impact might be anything from taster sessions. We did some work with Major League Baseball, I'm going to say last year. COVID's thrown me, so I don't know whether it's last year or whenever. And that culminated with us working in a load of schools to raise the profile of what baseball is. We worked with Major League Baseball. We worked with Baseball Softball UK to do that. We worked with a whole load of schools. It culminated with one of the children from the schools being selected to throw the first pitch at the Olympic Stadium. So that was nice. That was just a pure taster. And then we go right towards the other end where you get some established sports who want more exposure or have some funding or a desire to increase the user base with a younger generation. And some established sports who have always found it hard to get engagement. A good example of that would be fencing. We work with fencing who, and forgive me if my numbers are off, that they were something like 77th on the list of participation. And we worked with them for 18 months and they wrote a letter to Sport England because I think they'd gone up into the top 10 or just outside of it. It's certainly still one of our biggest sports because we just took it to the kids to have a go at.
Yeah, I guess that's one of the biggest. I guess you think about fencing outside of a school situation or in school, there's really big barriers to entry, right? I guess all the equipment, and I don't know if there's as many fencing clubs out there. It's just my opinion, layman's view of it. But then if you're taking it to the schools with the 1,200 coaches that you've got out there, then it's just widening the opportunities for everyone without them having to go and search it out.
Absolutely, and the reason for doing it is purely participation and to get kids into it and to get kids to experience it. And the brilliant thing about something like that is it's a level playing field. The non-sporty, in inverted commas, kids starting at the same point as the sporty kids, because no one's really done it before properly, other than with a lifesaver or something at home. So it's a great opportunity for every kid and every child to try it. But we actually did get, as a result of that, and as a result of that engagement, a child came through and wrote to us about a year ago, I seem to recall, and been selected for the GB team, and said that my first experience of fencing was with you guys in my primary school. So that was nice as well.
It's got to feel good, right? In terms of the industry, one question we always ask is, especially you've seen it from the start, really, like the sports coaching, especially sports coaching in schools era. What do you think is the biggest change? Like if you're looking at the sector back then, 1999, early 2000s to now, what's the biggest change you've seen since over that period?
Without doubt, the accountability and professionalism of the people going in. I mean, again, I'm talking slightly skewed because I'm talking from the perception of the business that I'm involved in. But I don't think now a school, and I think it's disrespectful to suggest that they would have people in a school who don't improve the children's experience at the very least and their education at the very best. So the accountability of what you're delivering as a third-party provider and an extended support staff is far higher than it was when we first started doing it. And that's good. And for me, it needs to go further still. I'd be happy. We've been talking with various different people for many years now about exactly that, about saying, look, set the bar at this level, make people jump over it, and measure that and test the people, to like you would do on a driving test, but go further than that. After they've done their test, after they have proved the competency, check in and make sure that is still being delivered to that level.
Yeah, definitely.
A teacher would have to do that. Ofsted are there for a reason, to check that that's happening, like it or love it. That's what they're there to do, to check standards. And we should have standards as well. I mean, the fact is that the schools that we work in, we have to comply to Ofsted standards is good, and keep it coming. That's my opinion.
Yeah, definitely. I think the more we do that, the more, because obviously there's always the scrutiny around especially now the PE premium. I know that wasn't there when you first started, but all the kind of evidence of impact and everything, that the work that needs to be done. So yeah, totally agree with that. I mean, just in terms of Premier, I know you've been so successful over this last period. What would you say is your kind of standout achievement if you were to pick one for the group?
That is so hard. The standout achievement would be too difficult, because it could go on a single person level, in a child, right the way through to the general impact of what we do on a day-to-day basis. So that is really difficult.
Well, what about you personally then? Do you have one for yourself?
Well, look, the fact that we've got people who joined us as 18, 19-year-old franchisees 20 years ago, which wouldn't happen now, but who have evolved into operating and impacting literally tens of thousands of kids in their particular businesses is great. The fact that we've seen people join us from a work perspective as an apprentice, and now have got senior leadership positions, and in some cases kind of industry leading professionals. We've got the impact from schools, where we have teachers or parents, as I said, individuals writing to say, this is the impact you've had. You kept up. This particular kid is kept in school because of your organisation coming in on a daily basis and inspiring the kid. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in school. The list is endless. It's very difficult to pinpoint one thing, and I think that's what is an interesting point of reflection for me. Certainly, is to probably embrace those a little bit more, and you often don't see them. Well, I often don't see them enough, those kind of things, because I know they're going on, I hear them, but I don't actually get the time as much now to actually see that impact. I see it with employees, I see it with staff, I see it with franchisees, but maybe not as much with the kids now. And that is something that actually I miss a little bit. But then what I do know is that I've got people who are a lot better than I, working with the kids and working with the staff to deliver to those children to make sure that experience is better.
Definitely. That kind of leads me on to this question around obviously you started the business as 20 years ago, it's a long time. Who do you think you've had to become to run the business now as opposed to when you first started, if that makes sense? So, because it's like a totally different business, right? And managing a group of companies. So what have you had to learn or change and become the leader you are now?
What a good question. Education is, for me, something that doesn't and didn't stop when I left school. Some would argue it didn't really even start enough at school, but it is something that happens all the time, every day. I put time aside personally now for my personal education every day for a certain amount of time. I think it's absolutely crucial. It's critical. We've got more tools now than we've ever had to be able to do that. I can watch a seminar. In fact, I started listening to a seminar last night by one of the world's greatest business life philosophers stroke coaches. Now, 20 years ago, I'd probably have to pay £2,000 to be in that room for a day or 2 days. I can now press a button and listen to that on YouTube. So there's no excuse for that and for not having that. So in terms of the leader that I've become and the leader that I will aspire to be, is continual education is really important. And there's a saying that youth is wasted on the young, and parents always say, I wish I knew then what I know now. And I find myself saying that now, but that's part of evolution and part of life. And it's a brilliant thing to know that actually tomorrow I might be a bit better than I was today.
But that's what you're doing with your franchisees, right? You're passing that knowledge on to them so they don't have to go through it. Yeah.
Absolutely. And for them, it's a shortcut. They don't need to go through. We've got some of the biggest individual operators in the country in our network. If a new franchisee starts with us on day 2, they don't need to find out about something by trying it and doing it and getting it wrong and having another go. They can just go straight to speak to the best in the country and ask them. And they'll tell them. And we'll tell them. So that education, that which can come from anywhere, can come from learning, formal learning, can come from talks, like I just said, can come from other people. That's really important. And the other thing is actually resource allocation. I find myself talking about this a lot now, and I've really seen a big jump certainly in our organisation on this recently, is maximising the resources that you have in a really effective way. And the biggest resource we've all got is time. We all wake up in the morning. That is the one level playing field everyone's got. We all wake up in the morning with 84,000 seconds available, and it's what you do with it that really counts, and how effective you are with that. And some people would perhaps think that means working 20 hours a day and all that sort of stuff. I don't actually. We don't advocate that at all. Some of our people do that sometimes, and that's why they're really great people to have around. But we don't advocate that. In fact, we discourage that. In fact, we set a format so that they shouldn't do that. Because lots of people are running around in a figure of 8, but not really active, but not really getting anywhere. What is really important is what impact you have in that time, and how you make sure you allocate that resource so that you do impact. And for me, the longer I've gone on, and if I was going to kick myself at something that I didn't know 20 years ago, it would be how to successfully manage both your time and other people's to be effective, because the amount of waste when more people are added into the equation in ineffectiveness can be, horrifying.
Last question from us. It's around daily routine. Now, do you have anything? I know you said you're carving out time for kind of personal development, learning, etc. Do you have any kind of daily routines that you do? Are you up early in the morning? Obviously, I'm guessing you're walking the dogs. You had them earlier on. What's your kind of routine things that you put in place so you can be at your best, I guess?
I have a default diary. There's a really famous book who I've had the pleasure of watching the guy live do a presentation on his findings, called Taming the Tiger. And it's an interesting book. Again, look on YouTube. You can see it.
Yeah, we'll put the link in the notes. Who's that by? Sorry, Taming the Tiger.
I don't remember the guy's name now, but he was one of the best orators I've ever seen. Taming the Tiger Within, and it's about a guy who, for a £1 bet, decided that he was going to become a jockey and race in a proper race. He'd never even been on a horse before, and for £1 he was going to do it within 12 months. So it's about the disciplines he had to do that. And he did it. And after he was even in the lead at one point. And after that, and obviously he tells the whole story about it. After that, he did the world's deepest ever free dive, about a year after that as well. Again, and it's all based around actually his process. He's got a famous saying, which I took from his speech, and which was change happens in the diary. And if you put it in the diary and you allocate the time to do it and you do it, it gets, you make progress. And in terms of daily routines, people will laugh that know me or work with me because that is all I continually talk about. Is exactly that. Keep your routine to the point where a few weeks ago in one of our staff assemblies, we kind of banned the word ad hoc, because it's not ad hoc, because it'll be something that has happened before. If it's a complete one-off event, yeah, that might be ad hoc, but then put that in the unplanned events bucket, put some time aside to deal with unplanned events. But other than that, nothing is ad hoc. It's always something that's recurring or predictable in some shape or form. And therefore you can plan time to deal with that. And my diary now, I mean, I could probably look in my diary on a Wednesday afternoon in 5 years' time and tell you exactly at 1 o'clock I'll be doing something around execution. I don't know what it is yet, but I will be. And at 9:30 to 10:30, I'll be dealing with the cash, the finance pillar of the business, because that's what I do every day at that time. And if I don't put it in, I wouldn't do it, and it would slip. So I think that default diary, that routine, as you call it, is absolutely critical. And that is what, if I was going to start and kick myself for 20 years ago that I didn't know that I do know now, that is what I would do.
Brilliant. No, thanks so much, David. Just one last one from me. I know you referenced a few books. If you were going to gift a book to someone, or if you do, or if you recommend books, what's the one that you would say to someone in, like our listeners, someone who's running a sports business at the moment, SME?
Robert Kiyosaki, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Famous, is top 10 books. Or certainly with that, everything becomes a lot clearer.
Brilliant. No, really appreciate it. We'll get that one in the show notes as well. So thanks so much for your time. Again, all your contact details, everything will be in our notes. So thanks for your time again.
No problem. Thanks ever so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to this week's show. You can subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can write to us at dryphase.podcast@coordinate.cloud, tweet us at coordinatesport, or follow us on Instagram at coordinate_sports, or on my account at James_ventures. This episode was produced by Nancy Kwamboka, with support from Claire Goodchild and Lola Small, with special thanks to Rochelle. I'm James Moore, and you've been listening to The Drive Phase from Coordinate Sport.